Friends, without the slightest doubt, Mr. KPS Gill, I have always regarded as one of the saviors of India since independence. And I had the good fortune to meet him first through my very, very dear friend Shekhar Gupta, and it was his house by the Brahmaputra, and it was evening, the time for his Buddha Sant, his old monk, and he would, and it was at that very occasion, it was during that trip that through Shekhar again I had met these people who he was supposed to be hunting. I'm sure he knew where they were and he was not catching them, and that was Praful Mohanta and Bhrigu Phukan, the university. And I got my glimpse of not just his firmness, but of his fairness. And during the conversation, I asked them, if you were to select one person, एक आदमी अगर आप, who could do what you want done, कि भी बांग्लादेशियों को बाहर भेजो, तो किसको आप select करोगे? वो कहते हैं KPS Gill को. Because it was not just firmness, they were absolutely convinced that he would be fair in whatever he did. And every time I met him, it was his only concern and his only conversation was about the country. And there would be an occasional sharp remark about some individual, but it would only be about because that individual was doing something which ought not to be done, or not doing something which ought to have been done much earlier. And at a time when the leadership was imprisoned in old ideas, this business of using minimum force, looking for a political solution all the time, and but you must appreciate the idealism of the youth. We used to hear in those days that after all, they are prepared to give up their life for a cause. When people were imprisoned and these policy makers were imprisoned by these, not just ideas, but cliches, here was a man who thought for himself, who thought completely innovatively, and who devised so many innovations which are written up in several accounts in Fault Lines and other journals. And as Ajay was just reminding us about that there was nobody who succeeded as much in completely defeating terrorism as he did. And Ajay was recounting one thing, and this is mentioned by him also, that at a time when certain areas were completely inaccessible, and the police officers suddenly received a message that there would be a meeting at 2 a.m. in that distant place, which was the heart of terrorist authority at that time. And after checking that, yes, it has to be there, so everybody rushed there with their convoys. And when they met, maybe 200-300 vehicles must have converged on this distant village. He said, well, this meeting is over. He wanted to establish this idea of dominance even at night. And so on. There were so many of these innovations of without any DRDO assistance, how he made the vehicles slightly more protective of the personnel who were being carried just by using local welders and things of this kind. And this innovation was carried in every aspect and at every level, from empowering the thanas to talking policy makers out of their cliches in this way. And therefore, it is justly written about the Gill doctrine. And as his son just mentioned about leading from the front, I don't think that we can think of another police officer today who would, in his own account of Endgame in Punjab, he mentions how on an average He was on tour 25 days a month in the worst affected areas. Today, in Chhattisgarh, I'm sure, without any disrespect to anybody at all, I realize the difficulties and the physical dangers, but the contrast that today we would have perhaps one ceremonial visit to an affected area by a senior police officer. Here is a person 25 days in a month, having, as Shekhar Gupta has written, never carrying a firearm and having nothing more than his swagger stick in his hand, going to these places. And he resurrected a force that everybody thought was so demoralized and so degraded that it would not be able to withstand and to do anything else. And he did this in the face of unimaginable difficulties. I remember his essay about others, the list of things on which decisions had not been taken, about snowmobiles not being allowed in the Siachen area by some joint secretary here. But the same thing had happened in Punjab, that the light machine guns which had been procured before independence were not allowed to be used by the thanas. And how much difficulty he had in persuading the policy makers that we should be allowed to use them. And all sorts of principles were introduced. And his life also exemplifies what the idiocies of politicians can do. Because I remember one of the prime ministers under this notion कि नहीं बंदूक की गोली से नहीं प्यार की गोली से जीता जाता है. And he conceded the first demand of the terrorists, which was कि KPS Gill को यहाँ से हटा दो. And instead of seeing that was the point which was hurting the terrorists the most, he thought that was the great concession which would win the goodwill and therefore win back the terrorists. And I always felt what I used to feel, Mark is here, what I used to feel about Europeans and the Americans at that time when they used to talk about our violations of human rights. I used to feel about this commentariat in Delhi and the PUCL, which the People's Union for Civil Liberties, which I left actually on the question of KPS Gill. That ए बाद भला उनको भी जरा दो चार थपेड़े हल्के से जो लोग अभी तक साहिल से तूफान का नजारा करते हैं. And we just do not realize what the circumstances were at that time and how people like him, they kept giving good advice even later on when they were asked, for instance, by the governments of Gujarat or of Chhattisgarh, and his great disappointment in the fact that none of that was taken. And even today we see the same thing. That I remember that at that time probably 2,000 persons, I remember, were trained for being in Bastar, and of them probably only 40 or so had actually been posted there. The rest had got the better allowances for training and had continued to stay in Raipur and the places. So I could go on, but I know that there we have very important speakers to listen to. I just want to mention one point with your permission, and that is that I will always associate with his memory our ingratitude. As untruth, as our sort of addiction to untruth, I feel that our ingratitude is one of our India's besetting sins. Because the very persons who saved Punjab for India, who are probably saving Kashmir for India today, are persons who we pillory and we distance ourselves from them. And it is a fact that at his cremation, and today the persons who would not forget, as Ajay reminded me, forget their being in power. They would not be alive today but for the fact that KPS Gill saved Punjab for the country and therefore for them to come back and assume power, not one of them was at the cremation. Not one of them is here. And I'd asked my very dear friend Arif, can you please tell me some line which conveys this ingratitude? And he's mentioned a beautiful line, कि जब गरज हुई तब प्यार किया. When there was a purpose, a compulsion, a need, an objective, तो प्यार किया. जब वक्त मिला तो याद किया. And there's just that it was only at that time. And therefore, Ajay, if you permit, I would like, in spite of exceeding the time, to read just one point of Mr. KPS Gill's thing, which is a searing indictment of India. And that is the press statement which he issued when Ajit Singh Sandhu committed suicide. So if you will permit me, I will just take 3-4 minutes of your time to read this, because it exemplifies everything about Gill. His concern for his fellow officers. I can tell you that I have never, but never felt smaller as an Indian than I did one day. Phone आया, I picked up, कि जी Arun Shourie है, मैं कि जी मैं बोल रहे हैं, I'm KPS Gill speaking, I want to come to your house. I said, नहीं sir, तुझे हुक्म करो, I will come wherever you want. He said, नहीं, मेरे के बंदे होंगे, I'll come to your place. And he came with 4-5 officers. He said, and I used to work in a Barsati, he had climbed these 3 floors, and we sat down. He said, इन्होंने पंजाब बचाया है. And since then, there has been a campaign for cases against them. And you are now in government, but I cannot find a lawyer. I cannot find a lawyer in Delhi to defend them. So you find me a lawyer. I tell you, I felt so small. I went from lawyer to lawyer, and in the end, Ashok Desai and others helped. But in the government itself, there was such discouraging advice of civil servants and others that the government hesitated to even CBI and others had got an opportunity to show how brave they were and how fair they were, and they were going to go after these Punjab officers. And it was so difficult, and the government waited till a Calcutta case in which the governor decided a particular case, and that was then used as a precedent to help a few officers. Those officers were being put in jails along with the terrorists, where they were beaten and thrashed by the same terrorists who were trying to break India. So I have never felt smaller than when Gill Sahab came at that time. But with your permission, I really want to read this. It shows you Gill's mastery of language. It shows you our ingratitude. It shows you what the circumstances at that time was and what we should think of. And it was a press statement that he issued on the death of, on the suicide of Mr. Ajit Singh Sandhu, who was then an SSP. He says, I have not called this press conference to express my grief at A. Sandhu's death. My feelings on this count are between his family and myself. What I have to say today is that we have already given up most of this country to criminals, to corrupt politicians, and to unscrupulous lobbyists who will work with any cause that serves their personal ends, whether criminal, political, or secessionist. Nonetheless, in a country dominated by those who prefer to criticize from the safety of their homes or the comfort of air-conditioned debating societies at Delhi and Chandigarh, there are still a handful of people who are willing to risk everything, including their lives and the lives of their families, to protect the unity and integrity of their nation and the lives of citizens terrorized by an utterly unprincipled and merciless enemy. I can say without reservation that A.S. Sandhu was one such man. No other officer will go to the defense of a man who had been as calumnized as Sandhu was at that time. Taran Taran, at the height of terrorism, was sometimes spoken of as the rocket that would propel Punjab out of the Indian Union. The terrorist influence was absolute. For years, it was virtually out of the control of the civil administration, and even the police had no more than a nominal and symbolic presence there. It was in such a situation that I was looking for an officer who had the courage to mount an effective campaign against militancy in this militant heartland. I spoke to several officers, and each excelled in the invention of ingenious excuses to avoid the responsibility. When I asked Sandhu if he was willing to go to Taran Taran to put down terrorism, he accepted without hesitation. Some will say that he went there to enjoy and exploit, and enjoy the power of the state. But the state, when Sandhu went to Taran Taran, had no power there. I know that he was a hair's breadth away from death throughout his tenure in the district. I know he never compromised, and yet he achieved everything I could hope for. Few today understand the significance of what happened in Taran Taran. And he goes on to explain that if Taran Taran had gone, the district would have gone, then 4 other districts would have gone, and Punjab would have gone, and that would have led to many other consequences for the country. All men are heroes in a time of peace. But those who are heading the self-righteous witch hunt against the officers and men of Punjab police today should ask themselves where they were hiding for 10 years when terrorists roamed free, unchallenged by any but the Punjab police and their comrades in uniform from other services, and a handful of courageous farmers who would not succumb to terror. For 10 years, the judiciary remained in a state of unmitigated paralysis in Punjab. Where was their commitment to justice then? For 10 years, the press published on the terrorists' dictate with only one single exception, and that all of you know of. That is a long vacation from truth. I am not here to defend corrupt or venal policemen, but the distortion and manipulation of legal process that is being resorted to by an utterly compromised, within quotes, human rights lobby cannot be supported. This lobby understands the nuts and bolts of the judicial engine and knows every method of the orchestration of the media and of the new tyranny of trial by the press. A police officer can effectively fight their designs only if he has a great deal of money to buy the best legal advice in the country, and only the corrupt have that kind of money. That's why he had to come to a person like me who just could not be, who felt so small at the fact that he had to come. He had to take the trouble. A sustained campaign was carried out by the human rights lobby against A.S. Sandhu on the Goebbelsian doctrine that an untruth repeated endlessly becomes the truth. He was supposed to have made a lot of money. That was what, in the end, led this officer to commit suicide. I do not, despite these circumstances, justify the action of a proud Jat Sikh committing suicide. But I understand the reasons. This is not the action of a coward unable to face the dangers of life. Sandhu faced more dangers during his tenure at Taran Taran than many brave men could in several lifetimes. It was not fear that drove him to death. I do not think that the man knew the meaning of the word. It was ingratitude. It is not, of course, surprising that having lost the battle for Khalistan through force of arms, the terrorists and their frontmen should have exploited the human rights angle to target men like Sandhu. What is unforgivable is that the nation he fought to defend, the people who he risked his life to protect, simply turned away in indifference, or joined the crescendo against him when such a plot was engineered, without checking the merits of evidence, without even giving him the opportunity of a fair trial. The Indian state must start educating itself on how it is to tackle individuals and groups trying to destroy the state, and it must learn how to arm and protect those who put their lives at stake in the defense of India's unity and integrity. We are not far from the edge of the abyss. Let this nation beware of the hour when no man will risk his life to protect another or to defend the nation. And he quotes Josh Malayapati in this: when men of courage begin to say this, all hope will die. No people who treat their heroes as we have done can expect to survive. So, even as we remember KPS Gill's leading from the front, his innovations and so on, one way in which we can honor him is to distance ourselves even by 1 inch from these two besetting sins of India, and that is our addiction to untruth and our ingratitude to these people who are the real saviors of India. Thank you very, very much.